In 1930, that little girl, Mary Agnes Moroney, was snatched from her home in Chicago. Her family spent their entire lives looking for her, but they all passed away without ever knowing what happened. Then, after 92 years of silence, a single DNA test, a miracle of modern science, finally revealed the shocking truth. It wasn't just about what happened to Mary Agnes, but about the full, complex life she went on to live. This is the story of how a 92-year-old mystery was finally solved, not with a dusty police file, but with a strand of DNA that unlocked a secret history and a legacy of pain. To really understand the tragedy of May 15, 1930, you have to understand the world it happened in. This was Chicago during the Great Depression. The city, like the rest of the country, was on its knees. Jobs were scarce, families were losing their homes, and nobody knew what the future held. For the Moroney family, living at 5200 Wentworth Avenue, this wasn't just a news headline, it was their everyday life. Michael Moroney, the father, worked tirelessly, passing out handbills for just $15 a week. His wife, Catherine, was only 17 years old, and already a mother to two little girls, 2-year-old Mary Agnes and 11-month-old Anastasia. On top of all that, Catherine was pregnant with their third child. The weight of their poverty was crushing. Desperate for any kind of help, a relative of Catherine's wrote to a local social service agency. A small paragraph about the family's struggle was then printed in a newspaper. It was a cry for help sent out into the city. They could never have imagined that this plea wouldn't bring a savior, but would instead lead a predator right to their front door. Somehow, through a terrible slip-up, the family's address, which was never supposed to be published, got out. On May 14, 1930, there was a knock on the door. When Catherine answered, she found a well-dressed woman standing there. She looked to be about 22, had protruding teeth, and spoke with what Catherine later called a cultured voice. The woman introduced herself as Julia Otis and said she'd been sent by a social worker to help the family. In a time of such hardship, someone showing up to offer help must have felt like a prayer being answered. Julia Otis was charming and sympathetic. She listened as Catherine described their struggles. Then, she made a shocking offer. She wanted to take little Mary Agnes with her to California for a while, promising the girl would be returned, fat as a butterball, once the family was back on their feet. Catherine, as desperate as she was a mother first. The idea of sending her child so far away with a total stranger was unthinkable. She refused, but Julia Otis was persistent. She didn't push, not right then. Instead, she handed Catherine $2, a huge sum for the Moroneys, and promised she'd be back the next day. True to her word, on May 15, just 5 days after Mary Agnes' second birthday, Julia Otis returned. This time, she brought gifts, baby clothes for the child Catherine was expecting. She was worming her way in, building a fragile trust based on the family's desperation. She even told Catherine she'd arranged for a better job for Michael. Then, she made a much smaller, more reasonable request. She just wanted to take Mary Agnes to a nearby store to buy her some new clothes and shoes. It was a far cry from a trip to California. Just a simple shopping trip, right around the corner. Catherine was still hesitant, and later said that Mary Agnes herself seemed to sense something was wrong. The little girl cried and refused to go with the woman. But the promise of new shoes, the gesture of kindness in a world that had shown them so little of it, was enough to sway a desperate young mother. Catherine let her go. She watched as the well-dressed stranger led her crying, 2-year-old daughter away from their home. It was the last time she would ever see her. As the hours stretched on, a dreadful realization washed over Catherine and Michael Moroney. Julia Otis and their daughter weren't coming back. Panic set in, a cold, sickening terror. The world they knew, already so hard, had just shattered. They called the police, and one of the largest manhunts in Chicago's history kicked off. The story of the beautiful, blonde-haired toddler snatched from her home horrified the nation. Newspapers everywhere ran front-page stories with photographs of Mary Agnes. The police launched an exhaustive investigation, scouring the city's train stations, thinking the kidnapper was really taking the child to California. They interviewed neighbors and chased down hundreds of tips that poured in from a worried public. But every single lead was a dead end. Every potential sighting was a case of mistaken identity. Then, the day after the abduction, a letter arrived. It was postmarked from Chicago and signed, as ever, Julia Otis. The letter was a twisted mix of reassurance and control. It read, "Please don't be alarmed, I have taken your little girl to California with me. I have hired a special nurse to care for her. We'll be back in 2 months. By that time you will be on your feet again and will be able to care for her. She didn't even cry a bit. Don't worry about her or anything else. The letter was a cruel form of torture. It offered a sliver of hope, that Mary Agnes was safe and would come back, while confirming their worst fears, she was really gone. It also seemed to confirm the police's theory that the trip to California was the kidnapper's plan all along. Based on this, Catherine got a warrant for the arrest of Julia Otis on kidnapping charges. 2 weeks later, a second letter came, adding another layer of mystery and psychological torment. This one was from a woman calling herself Alice Henderson, who claimed to be Julia Otis's cousin. She wrote that Julia was love-hungry, a heartbroken woman whose own husband and baby had died the year before. The letter repeated the promise that Mary Agnes would be returned safely. But after that, the letters stopped. The trail went cold. Handwriting experts looked at both letters and concluded they were almost certainly written by the same person. The names Julia Otis and Alice Henderson were just phantoms, created for this one crime. For Michael and Catherine Moroney, the years that followed were a living nightmare. They had more children and raised a large family, but the ghost of their firstborn daughter was always there. The Chicago Daily News later wrote that the loss of Mary Agnes had eaten into her like a cancer. The family was tormented by false hopes. In 1931, a girl matching Mary Agnes' description was found, and the Moroneys rushed to see her, their hearts pounding with hope, only to have it crushed when they saw it wasn't their daughter. The most torturous false lead came over 2 decades later, in 1952. A reporter named Eden Wright published a photo of the 7 Moroney children born after the kidnapping, struck by how much they all looked alike. She asked a poignant question: would there be a 24-year-old woman anywhere who resembles these children, and who might possibly be the long-lost Mary Agnes? Her question got an answer. In California, a woman named Mary McClelland, who knew she was adopted, was stunned by her resemblance to the children in the photo. A media frenzy exploded. The newspaper flew Mary to Chicago for a dramatic, tearful reunion with Catherine Moroney. "You look like her," Catherine whispered. "Mary, it's been so long." Using the best forensic tools they had, an anthropologist compared dental casts and said her teeth proved she was a Moroney. It seemed the mystery was finally solved. But even then, there were doubts. A rival newspaper worked to poke holes in the story, even quoting Catherine's mother as saying her instinct told her, "This is not my daughter." And then hard evidence surfaced. Police records showed that baby Mary Agnes had surgery for a ruptured navel that would have left a lifelong scar. Mary McClelland had no scar. Catherine Moroney herself, despite the public reunion, felt deep uncertainty. Her nephew later remembered what she truly felt after the meeting: "She's a great lady. Fantastic person. I wish she was my daughter." But no. The hope that had been so cruelly dangled in front of her was snatched away once again. Mary McClelland, though not their daughter, remained friends with the Moroneys. Decades later, a 2008 DNA test proved they weren't related, finally putting that chapter to rest. For the Moroney family, the cycle of hope and despair ended, leaving only the cold silence of the unknown. After the whirlwind of the Mary McClelland affair, the case of Mary Agnes Moroney slipped from the front pages and back into the cold case files. For the Chicago Missing Persons Bureau, it became a piece of folklore, a file that got older and dustier every year, a testament to a crime that seemed destined to be forever unsolved. It was the oldest case of its kind on their books, a 90-year-old question mark. For the Moroney family, that silence was a constant, gnawing pain. The frantic search had given way to decades of quiet, desperate wondering. Every birthday, every holiday, was marked by the absence of their firstborn. The younger siblings grew up with the story of their missing sister, a family legend steeped in sorrow. The parents, Michael and Catherine, carried the heaviest burden. Their tragedy had thrust their poverty and desperation into the national spotlight. They had been forced to endure false hopes and crushing disappointments. They prayed for a miracle that never came. Michael Moroney passed away in 1957. His final words were reportedly a testament to his lifelong search. "They never found my baby girl." Catherine, who was just a teenager when her daughter was stolen, lived with the pain for 5 more years. She died in 1962 at the tragically young age of 49, her heart broken by a lifetime of grief. She went to her grave never knowing what happened. The first generation of the Moroney family was gone, and with them, any direct memory of Mary Agnes. But the family's search for answers didn't die with them. The torch was passed to their children, and then to their grandchildren. One of Mary Agnes's nephews, Don Moroney, took up the cause with a special passion. He dedicated himself to solving the family's central mystery, combing through old newspaper articles and studying that black and white photograph of the aunt he'd never met. For Don and the rest of the family, it wasn't about revenge. The kidnapper, Julia Otis, was surely long dead. It was about something more fundamental, the need for truth. The need to fill the void that had defined their family for so long. They held on to one simple, powerful hope. As Don Moroney would later say, they just hoped that whatever happened to his aunt, that she led a good life and she was taken care of. It was this hope that kept the investigation alive, even as the trail grew impossibly cold. Decades passed, the world changed, but the question remained. Where was Mary Agnes? For almost a century, the tools used to investigate the disappearance of Mary Agnes were pretty much the same: detective work, interviews, and newspaper appeals. But as the 21st century began, a revolutionary new technology was starting to rewrite the rules for cold cases: genetic genealogy. Suddenly, science offered a way to travel back in time by reading the stories written in our very cells. All of us carry DNA, a genetic blueprint passed down through generations. Tiny markers in that DNA create a unique signature that links us to our parents, our grandparents, and even our distant cousins. Genetic genealogy changed the entire game. It took advantage of the boom in public DNA test services like Ancestry and 23andMe. Millions of people, curious about their heritage, were voluntarily uploading their genetic information, creating a massive, searchable database of family connections. Investigators realized they didn't need to find the needle in the haystack anymore. They could find the needle's third cousin and then, through careful research, build a family tree that could lead them right to the needle itself. The technique exploded into the public eye in 2018 with the capture of the notorious Golden State Killer. After that, the floodgates opened. Cold cases that had been dormant for decades were suddenly being solved. But could this powerful new tool solve a mystery that was nearly a century old? In June of 2022, the case of Mary Agnes Moroney, now 92 years old, landed on the desk of Detective Jose Rodriguez of the Cook County Sheriff's Office. He was part of Sheriff Tom Dart's Missing Persons Project, which focuses on cases where someone has been missing for more than 3 years. Detective Rodriguez knew traditional methods were useless. The key had to be in the DNA. The first step was to see if any of Mary Agnes's known relatives had put their DNA into a public database. Luckily, some of the Moroneys, including her nephew Don, had done just that. Working with a dedicated genetic genealogist named Luann Hughes, the modern search began. They weren't looking for a Mary Agnes Moroney. They were looking for anyone who shared a significant amount of DNA with the known Moroney relatives, a first or second cousin who was a complete ghost to the family. The search was painstaking. But in that vast digital ocean, they got a bite. A significant match appeared, linked to the family of a woman who had lived and died in Florida. Her name was Jeanette Burchard. Finding a genetic link to the family of Jeanette Burchard wasn't the end of the investigation, it was the explosive start. Now, the meticulous work of building family trees began. Detective Rodriguez and genealogist Luann Hughes had a huge task: connect the dots across almost 100 years of births, deaths, and marriages to prove how this woman from Florida could possibly be connected to a Chicago family whose child vanished in 1930. The first person they focused on was Jeanette Burchard's surviving daughter, a woman named Terry Arnold. Detective Rodriguez called Terry in September of 2022. For her, the call came completely out of the blue. A detective from Chicago, asking questions about her late mother in connection to a kidnapping from the 1930s. It was baffling. She had never heard the name Mary Agnes Moroney. She thought she knew her mother's life story. Her maternal family was Polish. The detective's theory just seemed impossible. But Detective Rodriguez explained the power of DNA and asked Terry if she'd be willing to take a DNA test herself, just to help them rule her family out. Confident it was all a big mistake, Terry agreed. She swabbed her cheek, sent it off, and waited. The results came back on October 28, 2022, and they turned Terry Arnold's world upside down. The DNA test revealed two shocking truths. First, Terry had almost no Polish ancestry. Her genes were overwhelmingly Irish. The Moroney family, the family of the missing girl, was also Irish. Second, and most stunningly, the test confirmed a direct family link between Terry Arnold and the known relatives of Mary Agnes Moroney. The science was unmistakable. Terry Arnold was the first cousin of Mary Agnes' nieces and nephews. This meant her mother, Jeanette Burchard, could only be one person, their aunt. She had to be Mary Agnes Moroney. For Terry, the news was a seismic shock, quickly followed by anger. Her anger was aimed at the woman she had known as her grandmother, the woman who had raised her mother. Suddenly, this woman she had known her whole life was cast in a sinister new light. Was she Julia Otis? Was she the kidnapper? The investigative team started working backwards, piecing together the life of the woman known as Jeanette Burchard. They discovered that Jeanette, raised as an only child, was told by her family that she was born on April 14, 1928, a date very close to Mary Agnes' actual birthday of May 10, 1928. She was told her biological father had died shortly after her birth. Critically, records showed that she spent the first 6 years of her life in Chicago. For 4 years after the kidnapping, Mary Agnes, now living as Jeanette, was in the same city as her biological family, who were frantically searching for her. The family that raised her eventually moved, first to Virginia, and then settling in Florida. The story they created was believable enough that no one questioned it for decades. But there were hints. Her stepfather once told Jeanette that the woman she called her mother was not her biological mother, a claim she was never able to confirm. She had even visited Chicago as an adult and asked relatives where she came from, but was either met with silence or was simply lied to. The secret was buried under layers of time and a new name. The genealogists kept digging. They found that the woman who raised Mary Agnes also had the first name Jeanette, an eerie coincidence. While the investigation hasn't formally accused this woman, Jeanette Anderson, of being the kidnapper, her granddaughter Terry has her suspicions. Her descendants have not allowed for her body to be exhumed, so a definitive link may never be proven. But for the two families, the Moroneys and the Arnolds, the DNA was proof enough. The 92-year-old mystery was solved. In February 2023, the news was finally made public. The Cook County Sheriff's Office, standing alongside the Moroney family, announced that they had found Mary Agnes. Her nephew, Don Moroney, who had spent a lifetime searching, could finally say the words he had longed to say, "There's no question in our mind." He asked law enforcement to officially close the case. The reveal wasn't a dramatic rescue, but a quiet, profound discovery. It was the closing of a circle that had been left open for nearly a century. The photograph of the 2-year-old girl with blonde, wavy hair could now be placed next to photos of a woman named Jeanette Burchard as a teenager, a young nurse, a mother, and a grandmother. The resemblance, though faded by time, was there. For the Moroney family, the news brought a wave of complex emotions. There was overwhelming relief. The question that had haunted their parents and grandparents was finally answered. There was joy in discovering that Mary Agnes hadn't met a tragic end, but had lived a long, full life. And there was connection. They had lost an aunt they never knew, but they had gained a whole new branch of their family. Terry Arnold and her cousins, the Moroneys, began exchanging phone calls and photos, bridging a 92-year gap. For Terry Arnold, the discovery completely rewrote her own identity. Her family history, she said, was completely different from what I was always led to believe. She had to process the anger at her grandmother, while also knowing that if these things hadn't happened, she wouldn't have had the mother she adored. She described her mother, Jeanette, as the world's greatest mom. And in this, she offered the Moroney family the greatest gift she could. She could tell them with certainty that their long-lost loved one, the woman they knew as Mary Agnes, had been loved, cared for, and had lived a good life. The Moroney family can honestly, truly know that she was loved very much. She said. The mystery of who actually took Mary Agnes remains officially unsolved. But for the families, the truth is known. The ghost that haunted Chicago has finally been laid to rest, not in a grave, but in the story of a life lived. So who was the woman that Mary Agnes Moroney became? Who was Jeanette Burchard? The answer, pieced together from her daughter Terry's memories, is a portrait of an ordinary life, which is maybe the most extraordinary part of this story. After being taken from a life of poverty in Chicago, she was raised as Jeanette, a devout Catholic and an only child. Her daughter Terry is quick to point out that she was well cared for, never hungry, and never abused. Anything my mom needed when she was a kid, she had, Terry said. She grew up, became a nurse, and spent more than 50 years of her life caring for others. She married twice and had 3 children. She was a woman of simple passions. She adored her pets, she loved opera, especially Madame Butterfly, and she was a die-hard fan of the Miami Dolphins from the day the team was created. She lived to be 75 years old, passing away in Florida in 2003, 2 decades before her original identity would ever be discovered. She never knew she was the subject of one of America's oldest and most famous cold cases. She never knew that a family in Chicago was still searching for her, still holding out hope on every one of her birthdays. The resolution is bittersweet. The Moroney family found their missing aunt, but they could never meet her. They can't sit down with her and ask the questions that still linger. Did she remember anything from her first 2 years? Did she ever feel like something was missing? But in another sense, they found everything they were looking for. They found closure. They found the truth. And they found out that their aunt, Mary Agnes, had a life filled with love, family, and purpose. Terry Arnold believes that if her mother had been alive to learn the truth, she would have reached out to the Moroneys without a second thought. She believes her mother would have told them, "I am here. I'm fine." And in the end, that is the message that, through the miracle of DNA, she was finally able to send her family, 92 years after she was taken away. The incredible story of Mary Agnes Moroney is a powerful reminder of family bonds, the pain of not knowing, and the relentless search for truth. It's a story that spans almost a century, connecting the desperation of Depression-era Chicago to the cutting-edge science of today. It shows that even when all hope seems lost, a hidden connection, buried deep in our own biology, can unravel the oldest and coldest of mysteries. The case of Mary Agnes Moroney is solved, not because of a forgotten clue, but because of the love of a family that refused to stop searching, and a technology that finally let them hear an answer across the chasm of time. What are your thoughts on this incredible resolution? Does knowing that Mary Agnes lived a full, happy life change how you see this kidnapping case? Share your perspectives in the comments below. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into one of history's most fascinating cold cases. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please consider subscribing for more explorations into mysteries once thought to be unsolvable.